Video, I left off, we just started different evidences for evolution, and we talked about fossils and the fossil record and so on. So that'll be where we left off. So where we're starting here is the second piece of evidence, which is called homologous structures. So find that in your notes. Found it.
Hey, what's a huma?
Oh, did it cut off?
Or
Human.
humor.
Alright, so what are homologous structures? Related species share similar characteristics resulting from common ancestry. What homologous structures are? They are the same or similar structures that have different functions. And that in parentheses is homologous structures. So this shows relatedness, evolutionary relatedness between organisms. So here, a popular example is the forelimbs of these various organisms, a human being one. And mine is color-coded, yours obviously is not, but it's color-coded in the book, in terms of how you can look and see that each organism has the same bones. There's two here. They're all put together the same, and so on, but have some slight differences in terms of, bless you. The digits, like for instance on the bat, much longer and spread apart because there will be skin in between them for gliding and so on. And so they have different functions, so therefore slightly different variation, but all have the same structure. And remember, our structures are determined by your DNA, so it shows similarities. So that's homologous structures. The third one, it says molecular homologies. This means similarities between molecules. Now this graph here is looking at, it says percent of amino acids that are identical to the amino acids in a human hemoglobin polypeptide. Hemoglobin, remember, is the protein that transports oxygen in our red blood cells. And so that is one molecule that we can compare from one organism to the next to see how similar they are. And the more similarities, then, the more related. And so, so here, everything on this chart is going back to a human. So from a human to a human, if we look at my hemoglobin and your hemoglobin, the chain of amino acids is identical, so therefore 100% the same. Between a human and the monkey, 95% the same. The mouse, 87% the same. And going down, eventually, this is a sea lamprey, only 14% the same, which you might hypothesize that they would be less similar. Proteins are made by what governs or decides how a protein is going to be made? Your DNA, right? The orders of the A's, T's, C's, and G's of your DNA determines the sequence of amino acids and so on. So therefore, another molecule, in addition to proteins, sometimes we look at proteins, we can actually sequence and see the order of the A's, T's, C's, and G's of DNA. And it's interesting that when you look at a molecule and then look at the DNA coding for, let's say, hemoglobin, we see the same pattern, okay? So organisms share the same molecules, so hemoglobin being one of those molecules. The same genetic code written in DNA, RNA, and protein. So all organisms have A's, T's, C's, nucleotides with A's, T's, C's, and G's to make up their DNA. All organisms, when they make RNA, have A, U, C, and G. And every organism uses the same 20 amino acids to put together to make proteins. All right, so what's different is the order of bases in your DNA and so on. So molecular evidence is another example of shared ancestry. And I want to point out that none of these evidences are standalone things, that nobody was alive, thousands and thousands of years ago. And so what we do is we take all of this information, so looking at homologous structures and comparing DNA and looking at the fossil record and taking all these things collectively to piece together to kind of come up with relatedness between organisms. And so nothing is standalone, but oftentimes things will support, one piece of evidence will support another piece, and so on. All right, another thing with this is that all eukaryotes have similarities because of the cells, the eukaryotic cells that we're made of. So all eukaryotes have similar internal structure and organization. What does that mean? All eukaryotic organisms, from a yeast cell, a yeast, which is a type of fungus, to us, if we look inside of our cells, we all have mitochondria, rough ER, all those organelles. And so to relate prokaryotic to eukaryotic cells, this is a review, the endosymbiotic theory. This is another way to say that is endosymbiosis. We've learned this before, so this is a review. Proposes that eukaryotes originated when large prokaryotes ingested and assimilated, which means it becomes part of them, smaller prokaryotic cells. What two organelles have we talked about that we think were once prokaryotic cells? Give me one, Brennan. Mitochondria, and another one?
The chloroplast.
The chloroplast. Can somebody tell me why we think that those two organelles were once free-living prokaryotic cells?
This might be part of the answer, but they have their own DNA.
Yeah, they have their own DNA. They have anything else?
Well, and we still know about single-cell organisms that can undergo photosynthesis, so we know that there are photosynthetic bacteria.
Yep.
And,
Okay. Anybody else want to add?
They have two membranes, like a membranous cell wall.
Yes, actually, like bacteria do. And then what else do they have? So if they have their own DNA, what do you need to make proteins? Ribosomes. They have ribosomes as well. All right, so evidence for this theory. All eukaryotes have mitochondria for energy transformation. Energy transformation is talking about what process?
cellular respiration.
Cellular respiration, right? So the mitochondrial DNA originates, remember, solely from the mother. Remember that when sperm fertilizes egg cell, sperm basically just donates the DNA. All the mitochondria and organelles and cytoplasm and so on comes from the egg cell of the mother. Autotrophs, like plants, have chloroplasts for photosynthesis. Both mitochondria and chloroplasts grow and divide on their own, like bacteria. And they both resemble modern bacteria in that, I'll put in parentheses, they have DNA and ribosomes. All right, that's two big things there. I know it's going to be hard to see this last little bit here. People, it's way down there, so I apologize for you guys if you really can't see it to move around. All right, so it's interesting. They found some red seaweed, Porphyridium is the name of it, and it says the DNA in the plastids of this red seaweed. Plastids are a group of organelles in which chloroplasts are a part of, and so they actually, when they compared, I left this up here, this picture up here from the previous hour, that this is the plant cell from the red seaweed, and this is the nucleus, has their own DNA in it, and this is the chloroplast, has its own DNA in it. And so what they found in sequencing and comparing the DNA, looking at the DNA in the chloroplast, it actually more resembles a bacteria cell's DNA than the DNA in the actual plant cell itself. All right, and so therefore another piece of evidence of symbiosis. And so this is just a review picture that we've talked about before. Here's your prokaryotic cell. Here's your aerobic bacteria. Aerobic meaning it can use oxygen to do cellular respiration, is engulfed by endocytosis, and so then you have it being assimilated into the cell, and we get our animal cells and eukaryotic cells that do not do photosynthesis. If some of those engulf the photosynthetic bacteria, and assimilated that, we have the chloroplast, and that is the precursor to plant cells. There are some unicellular organisms called protists that can do photosynthesis as well. So that kind of shows the relatedness between eukaryotes, but also eukaryotes and prokaryotes. Another one for evidence for evolution is similarities between embryos. And so, looking at adults of organisms, you can see physical characteristics that are similar or dissimilar. But also looking at various stages of life, we can also compare and can show similarities that we don't see in other stages of life. So this is a chick embryo and a human embryo. So obviously a chicken and a human are very, very different. But very early on in development, there are some similarities. So very early on in development, humans have a post-anal tail. Clearly, we don't have that as adults, all right? And then the same thing with the chick embryo, and then pharyngeal pouches develop into lungs. Okay? We can also look at structures called vestigial structures. These are structures that some organisms have that seem to be remnants from the past. So they have no apparent function in extant. That's the opposite of extinct. That means living organisms. They resemble structures that possibly their ancestors have, and so they obviously still have inherited the genes for those structures, but don't use them. And this is demonstrated in the fossil record. They found snakes with pelvis and leg bones, leading to the idea that they possibly had legs. All right, and could have walked. This picture here shows, it says the blind mole rat. This organism has eyes and eyeballs, but they actually have skin covering over their eyeballs. So therefore they don't use their eyeballs to see, all right, but they have eyeballs, all right? So can somebody tell me how that would come about? Brennan?
Well, I mean, they live almost, they all live underground, so there's not a whole lot of light down there, so they wouldn't really have any need for eyes. So over time, I would think that eyes would just have disappear.
All right.
Yep.
Right, but do they go, oh, we don't need this, like, let's just get rid of it? So they have eyes. How did the skin covering over the eyes come about in the first place? Mutation. So some mole rat must have had a mutation that they covered their eyes. Now, and if they lived in an environment in which eyes, you were talking about in the dark, that eyes may not be an advantage, then the rats with the skin covering over their eyes really weren't at a disadvantage, right? Could they have an advantage? Like, why would it become more plentiful?
Like maybe when they're digging or something, like over dirt in their eyes and it bothers and gets like can get like in the way.
Yeah, so maybe there was a selective advantage for that mutation. And so remember that mutations that are helpful become more plentiful. And so they still have the genes for the eyeball, but more and more of the rats have skin covering over their eyes because it didn't hurt them and could have maybe given them an advantage. Okay? So that's an example of a vestigial structure. And the last one, I'm going to wrap this chapter up, is biogeography. So geography is where they live. Bio is living things, where they're at. So this is looking at the geographic distribution of species. And in studying species around the world, we find that species that live closer together are more related than species that live far apart. All right, so the species that live closer to one another tend to be more closely related than those that do not. Can somebody tell me why that makes sense? Why would that make sense if they live closer together?
Maybe the environment is more similar, so the things are like more similar between each other than something that lives on the opposite side of the world. Maybe they don't have the same food or I don't know, the same temperature or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then if their environments are different, then the traits that are helpful for survival in that environment will be different. So a population living in a warmer climate and a population living in a colder climate, different traits will be helpful for survival there. And so then remember, the organisms that have traits that help with survival will survive better, and then they'll pass their genes on to their kids, and it'll become more plentiful in that population. And so therefore, that's why we see species that live closely, or closer together, they're more closely related. Example, Australia. Australia is kind of off by itself. They have a diverse population of native marsupial mammals. And so, versus placental mammals. So, like here in North America, most mammals are placental. And we don't have this diverse marsupial mammals, but they do on this isolated island. And so I learned that a lot of people don't know what the difference between marsupial and placental mammals are. So let me just talk about that for a second. So marsupial mammals means the baby is born and then goes into a pouch and finishes development in the mother's pouch. Okay, so so that would be a kangaroo. Okay, we are placental mammals. The baby completely finishes development within the uterus of the mother, and the placenta helps deliver oxygen and nutrients to the baby. So for instance, mom's blood doesn't come into contact with baby's blood, but mom's blood delivers nutrients from the food she eats, and when she breathes, it delivers oxygen to the baby so that those nutrients and oxygen get there via the placenta and the umbilical cord. Okay? So that's the difference there. And so so we don't have marsupial, so they're kind of isolated, the mammals on Australia, and then mate with each other, all right, and therefore are not like other organisms. And that's the end.
Is there like a reason that the marsupials have approaches against
Like, is there an advantage of, like, of, not that I'm aware of, yeah, good question.